Well, hello. Today I'm going to show you all how to make a pie crust. We're not going to talk about so much the recipe, although I will link it in the comments below. We're going to talk about the um, the process. So pie dough, pie crust is all about patience and feeling the dough and making sure that you have the right purport ratio of fat to flour. And the kind of fat you choose makes a difference. The temperature of the dough is crucial. And the way you handle the dough, whether you overwork it or overstretch it or don't work it enough, is what's going to be the difference between a bad crust, a mediocre crust, or a really flaky, wonderful, marvelous thing. And so I want you to pay attention, take notes if you need to, and then when I see you in class, you'll be at a point where you can just sort of go with me, and I'll repeat all of this stuff. If you take my class, I'll repeat it all, and it'll all make sense. But I think watching it once will help a lot. So take a moment and take notes. All right, so here we are, and I have all of my accoutrements set out here. I've combined in this bowl a teaspoon and a quarter of salt and 2.5 cups of unbleached all-purpose flour. I have tried pastry flour, I have tried whole wheat pastry flour, and you know what? Good old-fashioned all-purpose flour works just fine. You need a good quality flour, right? And it should be unbleached. I like the unbleached flour better. I don't even typically buy bleached flour anymore. And this is a recipe that, that's the King Arthur Flour Company recipe that I'm using. It's pretty similar to the recipes I grew up with. And what you want, the reason you want to check a recipe is so you make sure you get your proportions of fat and flour correct. I have my little tablespoon here. I have a fork to blend in things. You can always also use a pastry cutter, but in case you don't have one, I'm going to demonstrate with a fork. In fact, I'm going to get a bigger fork. This was a salad fork. I'm going to use my dinner fork. And I'm using a combination for fat of unsalted, I'm going to say that again, unsalted butter and vegetable shortening. All right? And I get my vegetable shortening in these sticks because they're marked off. It's easier to get a good, a perfect measurement. So good old Crisco. And I do have a brand preference, and it is Crisco. I know I'm going to get a good product. It doesn't have any kind of stuff in it. If you use lard, there's a whole conversation about lard, but for many reasons I don't use lard. And my family stopped using lard when I was about 10 or 11 years old. So we're going to use what a lot of people call a medium flake, the medium flake method, where we're going to cut in half of the fat and combine it, and then cut in the rest of the fat. You get a nice medium flake. Since we're using butter, we're going to take advantage of that by adding the butter last. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So this recipe tells me that I need 10 tablespoons of fat. I could use 10 tablespoons of the butter or 10 tablespoons of the shortening. I'm going to do a little less than half and half, right? So I'm going to give it 6 tablespoons of shortening and 4 tablespoons of butter. So I get all the advantages of tenderness from the shortening, and I get the umami and the flakiness from the butter. Okay? So I'm going to count these off. that's going to give me 6 tablespoons of the shortening. And then I'll need a half a stick of butter. That's 4 tablespoons of butter. Okay. I'm going to immediately return this stuff to the refrigerator. So we keep our shortening and our butter in the refrigerator, well sealed so it's not picking up odors. So now, I'm going to put in my 6 tablespoons of shortening. So I'm going to give it I'm going to take out a tablespoon and I'll combine that with the butter. So we're going to do this half and half. I've whisked together my dry ingredients. And I'm just going to put that in there. Not a problem. I'm going to cut it in. I'm going to get it all. I'm coating the fat with the flour. I'm getting it all mixed in there. This is my tender part. All right? I'm going to put that in there. In fact, I'm going to go ahead because I know what I want to have happen here. And I'm going to put in all of my shortening, even though it's a little more than half. Because what I want is the shortening to combine effortlessly with the butter, with the flour, excuse me. So that's going to give me my tenderness. There we go. Now I'm going to start with the butter. The butter, I want to work with my hands because what I want is a flat disc of butter. I want those chunks of butter in there that are going to allow my crust to really flake up for me. So I've got some wax paper on here. Let me take that off. So that means I'm going to cut my butter up into cubes. That little piece of wax paper wants to stay. It wants to be a part of my pie. Okay. Here we go. And then I'm going to use the tips of my fingers to work this butter into the flour and shortening mixture. So I'm just mashing that up. I want to get my flour to love my butter. All right. I try to run my hands under some cold water. It's nice because it's a chilly day out today. So my flour is cold. Sometimes I put my flour in the refrigerator. If I'm going to be doing this, especially if it's hot, I'll put my flour in the refrigerator early on or the day before, because my job now is to keep everything cold. Okay. So we're going to do that. What we want is flat discs of butter. So making pie dough, you have to get in touch with your inner child. You remember when you used to make mud pies or play with Play-Doh and you get your hands all dirty and your mother would yell at you? Well, now you get to just do that. And again, if you are comfortable with a food processor, there are lots of instructions out there on how to make the food processor. But here's the thing about the food processor. It's going for uniformity. So it's kind of hard to get these little discs I'm talking about of butter in a food processor. But that's just me, you know? To each his own. So now we've got this crust that's about half shortening, a little more than half shortening, and half butter. That butter is going to give you that beautiful mouthfeel, right? Now there's another recipe that I sometimes use for a single crust that's mostly shortening and a couple of tablespoons of butter. It works fine too. If you're afraid of butter, and a butter crust it'll shrink on you. So if you're afraid of butter, that's what you want. This is how you want to work this. So we're going to do this. I'm going to do my due diligence. There it is. So I've got this sandy crust with little discs of butter in it. All right, let me get that up close to you. Try not to make a mess. But you see how there are these discs of butter? Like there's even like some of them are like little lumps of butter. We can, all right? That's what you want. Now we need to add some moisture. I have a cup of ice water here. It's filtered water from my refrigerator. I made sure my ice was fresh because we're going to taste anything that any off flavors. It'll come in because all you've got working for you is butter and shortening. There's nothing to hide behind. A little salt. And we're going to start out with 4 or 5 tablespoons. I'm going to toss that together. And what we want this dough to come together. We don't want it to be too wet, right? There's no way to save a dough that is too wet. So how do we test it? Well, you toss it together. If she's not coming together right away for you, then you give her 1 more tablespoon of water, and I'm sprinkling it over there. Toss it again. And what you want to have happen is if you pick up some of it, it should hold together when you squeeze it. So, let's see. And whatever you do, do not just pick up, I'll give it just 1 more tablespoon. Do not just pick up this measuring cup and dump a bunch of water in there. Even if the recipe tells you to do that, don't do it. Ha, there she comes. I believe that is the reason that I fail with my food processor, because I need to feel my dough. The food processor, you kind of have to trust the machine, and I can't. So I'm not happy with the hydration. I put my hands in that bowl of water and then I come back, because now I'm really just wanting to get just to the point, and I'm tossing. I'm trying not to squeeze, because if I squeeze, if I start to knead this dough, I'm going to develop the gluten and I'll have Play-Doh. It'll be tough. It'll roll out real pretty, but it'll be Play-Doh. Ah, there she comes. So you see how it's kind of shaggy? That's telling me that it's coming together. So I'm going to get this into a ball, and then I'm going to wrap it up in some wax paper and put it in the refrigerator. And then I'm going to go away, and I'm going to I'm going to clean my house and do some stuff. And what I'm waiting for is for this dough to get really cold. Really cold. Because that's what makes a flaky dough. It's when it's cold and the fat is solid, and then when the fat melts, in the oven and releases steam, you get this wonderful dough, and you get that flake. So I need to go wash my hands and wrap this up in wax paper. Like, yeah, this is parchment, but what you would do is you wrap it up in your wax paper, put it in the refrigerator, and at that point you're ready to bake when it comes out cold. Okay, y'all, so we're back now, and we're going to roll out our pie crust, and I'll show you how to use it. Today, I'm going to use one of them to make a quiche, and then tomorrow, I'm going to use the other one, which will be deeply chilled, to make 2 sweet potato pies. And if I remember, I'll show you how to do that too. All right. All right, so I have here my... this is a little gadget that I just love. It's a circular pie crust roller. You can get them. I got mine one at a kitchen store and the other one from the King Arthur's Bakery online, King Arthur Flour Company, excuse me. And so I'm going to just sprinkle this with flour, spread it all out. And I took my pie crust out of the, I'm going to move my camera a little bit. I took my pie crust out of the refrigerator, one of them. And I'm going to use the whole thing for this one because this is a big quiche. I'm going to put it in here. She's nice and cold. Zip it up. If you don't have one of these, you can just use 2 sheets of wax paper. I'm going to move y'all in a little bit. You can use 2 sheets of wax paper or 2 sheets of plastic wrap. If your crust has a lot of butter in it, you might have to beat it a little bit, but mine is pretty good. She's pretty soft. So the first thing you want to do is get her flat. And then once you get her flatter, you want to ease up a little bit and you want to roll it out from the center, right? Light strokes, because remember that gluten I warned you about. And then when it's light strokes, and I'm going to adjust my lighting a little bit because I think we're getting some glare. Let's see. Yeah. See if that'll help. So, all right. So you want to do light strokes, and you want to make sure that you're turning your dough, right? Even in this bag, you want to turn it over periodically to make sure. Now, if you're macho and you're one of those people that, you know, has watched TV and you've seen the chefs on TV just rolling it out on the countertop, you know, and then it's all perfect, and you have to use a bench scraper at that point. I am happy to cheat and roll it out in my little bag or between 2 sheets of paper, wax paper, or whatever. And when it gets to be bigger than your pan, right, then you're going to transfer it. I'm going to finish doing this because I can't talk and chew gum at the same time, and we want to keep this cold, and I'll be right back. All right, I've finished rolling out my dough, and you can see all those beautiful flecks of butter. That's going to help me to keep it to get flaky. I'm going to put my quiche in this big pan. That's why I needed that big, all of that dough. And then I'm going to layer my ingredients and pop it in the oven. Now, if you want to know the recipe for the quiche, I based it on a recipe in The Joy of Cooking. let's see if we can get this to happen for me without Surus. There we go. I based it on a recipe, on the basic quiche Lorraine recipe in The Joy of Cooking, right? I don't eat, my family doesn't eat meat, so there's no bacon or anything like that. But what I needed that recipe for was to remind me of the proportion. So you get a basic recipe that gives you all the information you need, and you can see I'm piecing some of that pie crust in there, and I'm going to crimp this edge. And then you can riff on it, right? You can do, I think I have a cookbook called The Improvisational Cook, if I can remember the name of the author, and if I'll find it, and then I'll put it in the chat below. But you just need to get your basics down, and then you can riff, right? So I'm going to make my quiche. I'm going to put my fillings in here. I'm going to put it in there for the appropriate amount of time. And then I'll have dinner. This is something that I often do during the week, especially if I have a crust that I've made and it's in the freezer. When I was working, this was a nice way to have a homemade meal. All right, so here I go. I'm going to put my ingredients in. I have some caramelized onions. I just chopped up an onion from my CSA. If you're local to Philadelphia, next year you should really look up Taproot Farm CSA. They are awesome. So there's all my stuff that I want in the quiche. And I am using, this is why I'm using this thick, this deep dish, is because I put a lot of stuff in my quiche and we don't want it to roll over. There it is. And I like a lot more, I'm going to probably sprinkle a little more cheese on top of there. So I have Swiss cheese and cheddar cheese. Pop it in the oven and it's soup. You guys keep cooking. I'll talk to you soon.